Hi everyone, Joshua Kirk here with you once again, and now it's time for episode 101 of Album of the Day. And yes, it is 101 of Album of the Day, in which today I'm going to sort of talk about the latest album by sort of an alternative rock and power pop group from Los Angeles, who sort of made their mark in the 90s with their first couple of records, which, the band that I'm talking about is by the name of Weezer. They released their debut album, which was self-titled, back in 1994, also known as the Blue Album, which boasted some very catchy, songs such as My Name is Jonas, Buddy Holly, Undone Sweater Song, and Say It Ain't So, which had these kind of catchy melodies, as well as these kind of, witty, sort of nerdy sort of lyrics. Their second album, Pinkerton, came out in 1996. Initially, it was released to mixed reviews and, poor sales, but then it eventually was hailed as a classic, hailing some more visceral, more sort of darker, symbolically songs, which had musically a more visceral, maybe a little more experimental kind of sound to it. I do agree with a lot of people that those first two albums that Weezer put out are definitely fantastic and definitely true classics for sure. Maybe someday I'll do a review of maybe sometime I'll do a throwback review of Pinkerton someday, since I used to do a lot of throwback reviews, and I'm still going to be doing lots of those in the future. Just there's so many new releases out this year that I want to talk about. But lately in the 2000s, Weezer have sort of gone for a nosedive a little bit, releasing several awful albums, and they were just sweetening up to their sound to the point where, if they were food, I would just throw up in my mouth every time I listened to them. But somewhere around the 2010s, they started improving a little bit with their sound, thankfully. With their last record, Everything Will Be Alright in the End, which came out in fall of 2014, which I thought was a fantastic record. A few moments on it that I wasn't really a fan of, but for the most part I thought it was a great album. But now I'm here to review their latest album that just came out last month, this year. The album is called, it's self-titled, but it's also known as the White Album, and not to confuse it with the Beatles' White Album. But I wanted to review this album because, in my opinion, this is Weezer's most consistent album in, years. The Needle Drop recently did a review of this album and gave it a really positive review, and I would have to agree with him. This is probably their most consistent record since 1996's Pinkerton, in my opinion. And by consistent, I mean there's not a lot of cringeworthy moments on it, and while I do think their last album was fantastic, there were a few moments on it that sort of, I wasn't really a huge fan of, that made it, maybe not 100% consistent, probably. But anyway, this is what it looks like. Sorry, it's really bright. But anyway, there are the credits there, and there's the disc. And underneath the disc is, the Weezer logo on there. The W. And then there's the lyrics and the thank yous that are in here. So this is the fourth album that Weezer released that was named after a color that was on the album cover. So yeah, that's the CD version of the newest album by Weezer, which is known as the White Album, or just called Weezer, self-titled. So yeah, I feel that this record definitely shows them cranking out you know, some of their catchiest, most sort of, you know, and some of their sunniest tracks to date. Like, you know, this is, you know, not really a record that's really trying to do anything, like, radically new. Weezer are just sticking to their guns to this record, but I think that's all it really needs. What it needs is some good, catchy, summery power pop and alternative rock as well, and it brings back sort of the angsty sort of, you know, and it brings back sort of the angsty sort of, you know, cred that, you know, Weezer was sort of known for. So the opening track on this album is called California Kids, and the intro features like a field recording of a beach, as well as a little noted intro played via a guitar and a xylophone, and then eventually it goes into the actual song, which, you know, is definitely sort of which definitely, you know, shows that Weezer sort of are, you know, playing something that sounds a little more like their older stuff, with like the siren-y wailing guitars and like just the boom 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 rhythms on there. The lyrics on here may be a little bit of maybe an understatement, talking about how the California kids are like really willing to help you with your problems, but melodically, I think it's a really nice track. And of course features Rivers' very raw and intimate sort of vocals, which you know is pretty much easily recognizable on there. And of course it features Patrick Wilson's signature, like, you know, like sort of, you know, up-tempo drumming, as well as like, you know, some riding bass as well. Then you get into the track Wind in Our Sail, which, you know, features this plinky little piano sort of hook on there, on the verses and chorus. And then plus, you know, it has some pretty nerdy lyrics on there, like the line that mentions mental experimenting with a P. And of course, you know, this is definitely one of the, definitely a very catchy song right here. So, another, like that's another upbeat track that I think is great. Like, you know, this album sounds radio friendly without being overly commercial or anything like that. I mean, this isn't the over commercial, like, sound that they were sort of, you know, messing around with on albums like Make Believe or anything like that. And then you get into the first single on the record, which is called Thank God for Girlz, and this is sort of a, this is sort of a nerdy sort of track on the record. This is one that stirred up a lot of opinions. Some people loved it, some people hated it. I thought it was pretty, I thought this song was actually quite enjoyable. The lyrics on this one, they can be kind of silly, maybe a little dorky. It does mention cannolis, but, you know, but underneath all that, it's pretty much kind of this kind of sad, maybe darker lyrically sort of song about, like, unrequited love or something like that, and has some pretty, you know, sort of weird religious undertones going on in it too, like, Philip from Consequence of Sound. I know you didn't like this track, but I respectfully disagree with you on this one. Because I think the lyrics are kind of more absurd than anything. And musically, it's more driven by, like, pianos and, musically it's more driven by, like, pianos, besides, like, the roaring Weezer guitars, and, you know, of course has the drum coming in, as well. Then eventually it has sort of, you know, the drum coming in. Of course you have the drums coming in. Like, this is a song that I think I like more in the context of this record than I do just a single, because as a single, it is catchy, but at the same time, it's maybe a little too somber for it to get played on radio or anything like that. And then there's the track "Girl, We Got a Good Thing," which has a little bit of a Beach Boys sort of vibe to it, especially with the harmony vocals. And this song, this song, while it may be maybe a little too cute, maybe a little too sweet, it is a love song. But at the same time, still sounds pretty nice and pretty catchy, as well. Like the hook on it is pretty catchy. On there, even if it is maybe a little too sweet, probably. Then you get into the edgy, salty side on the record, which appears on the track "Do You Want to Get High?" And the title, it just sounds like a generic, just cheap song about wanting to get high and smoke weed, but but the result actually is not really about that. It does deal with an actual experience Rivers had where he kind of had maybe behavioral problems because because of some of the drugs he was taking or something like that. And musically, it's definitely one of the heavier, edgier tracks on the record. I mean, the guitars are pretty. I mean, with these guitars that are with these guitars that are kind of fuzzy and aggressive, paired with aggressive, and also I do like some of the old school music references on this track and the lyrics. Like they do reference older music. They do reference older musical artists like they did on their older records, like Rivers Cuomo does. There's a reference in there to Burt Bacharach and stuff like that. And yeah, this is definitely just a great, just badass song. Definitely one of the highlights on this record. Then you get into the track "King of the World," and Philip from Consequence of Sound. I know this is another track that you weren't a fan of, but me personally, I thought it was great. This track, to someone who's only heard teenage pop songs his whole life, to them it just might sound like an upbeat, radio-ready song about wanting to rule the world and wanting your girlfriend to be your queen, but that's not actually what the song's about. It does deal with sort of Rivers' sort of anxiety, and this probably has something to do with his wife or something like that. With her, walking around the magazines, sitting on the rack at the CVS, and he finds out about a movie star divorce and 300 dead in an airplane wreck. And she just feels all the people suffering, and she kind of has this anxiety, she remembers horrible things that happened to her during her childhood, and Rivers is sort of trying, and the protagonist and Rivers is trying to tell her that it's all right, and if I was king of the world, and if you were with me, you wouldn't be sad anymore unless you really wanted to. And musically it's kind of punchy and a little edgy musically, of course, with the roaring Weezer guitars. And I do like that part. I do like that hook where it's like a guitar. It's like a guitar and a synthesizer playing a little harmony with each other on there. I do like that. That's on there. But yeah, definitely a great single right here. And this is the one that they've performed on Good Morning America and stuff like that. Oh, and I also want to highlight there's kind of weird talk box guitar intro at the beginning. Thought it was maybe some weird saxophone at the beginning, but when I saw the live performances, turns out it's Brian Bell, playing his guitar through a talk box, kind of inspired by Peter Frampton a little bit. Yeah. Frampton a little bit. And then you get into the track Summery Lane and Drunk Dory, which I do like the hook on that track, but to be honest, this is kind of my least favorite track on the whole record. Pretty much because the lyrics on it seemed a little cheap and weren't really all that interesting to me, you know. So like this is the kind of song where I could just listen to the hook and care less about the lyrics or stuff like that. So yeah, you know, that's kind of my least favorite track on the record. Then you get into the song LA Girlz, which sort of goes back to a similar topic that was in, like, the Thank God for Girls track, which deals with Rivers' anger with, like, all these, with, like, unrequited, with, like, unrequited love, and sort of his anger with, like, you know, sort of, you know, all these kind of, you know, LA girls kind of, you know, acting like, you know, acting like he has the plague or something like that. And it actually sounds like it was maybe recorded a little older than even the 90s when River sings, LA girls, please act your age, on there. And then you get into the track Jacked Up, which has this kind of, catchy little, like, dinging piano hook on there, to pair with, again, some, like, anger in the lyrics about, being all jacked up or stuff like that. So this song, to an untrained ear, it might sound like just a radio-friendly piano rock song or something like that, but, that's not really what it is if you just listen to it very carefully on there. But there, yeah, it definitely does pair really nice to sort of the soured side of the album that was on tracks like Thank God for Girls or LA Girls. In my opinion, the salty side of the record have to be tracks like Do You Want to Get High and King of the World. And then next you get into the closing track on here, Endless Bummer, which is kind of an acoustic little number driven by a little hey, 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 like Beach Boys inspired vocals on there. And while it's not the best song on the record and probably not as memorable as some of the other cuts, it's still a good, nice, sweet little acoustic number. And I do sort of relate to some of the lyrics a little bit. I'll have to tell you about this line that I kind of relate to. There's a line in there, I count my steps because I'm OCD. That line sort of speaks to me because I have had sort of an OCD problems in my life before. So yeah, this is kind of one of the sadder tracks on the album, actually. So maybe it may be a little bit of a tearjerker at the beginning. But then, like, the ending, it, goes electric at the end and throws in this really awesome guitar solo from Rivers Cuomo before it eventually, the song ends and it closes out basically with, like, another field recording of, like, a beach. So I'd probably like to, Weezer likes to think of this record as, like, a beach record, which makes sense. The album cover has all four members, like, on a sandy beach in, like, California, on there. And plus, musically, it's kind of summery. I mean, I did recently put this record on my iTunes because I thought, well, this might be a great thing to put on my iPod to listen to during the summertime, or, something like that, like on a beautiful day or something like that. This isn't like a rainy day kind of record. Day record, even though, you could listen to this on a rainy day and still feel pretty, joyous when you listen to it. So I'm like, I'm really digging this new Weezer album. If you're kind of a Weezer purist who's looking for that nerdy, catchy, but also kind of visceral sound that Blue Album and Pinkerton were solely focused on, if you're just, tired of that super commercial, ultra sweetened sound that a lot of their albums in the 2000s, unfortunately, focused on. You know, if you want that old Weezer sound, well then, this is a record for you. But I think old school and new school fans might find themselves enjoying this record, pretty much. I'm kind of an old school fan. Not that I knew the band like a long time ago, but I'm kind of old school in the sense that, you know, I stick to their older stuff along with Everything Will Be Alright and this record. But yeah, definitely recommend this album. So that's my review of the new self-titled album by Weezer, also known as the White Album, not to confuse with the Beatles again. And see you for episode 102.